The desert was endless. Sand stretched as far as the eye could see, burning under the sun. Heat waves danced across the horizon, making the mountains in the distance look like ghosts. A lone human walked through this unforgiving land. His clothes were torn, his lips were dry, and every step felt heavier than the last. He had no map, no water, and no hope, only the will to survive. The man's name was Daniel. Days ago, his small transport ship had fallen from the sky. He was the only survivor. Since then, he had wandered the alien desert with nothing but a broken blade and his stubborn heart. His mind whispered to give up, but his spirit told him to keep moving. He did not know where he was going, but he believed he had to keep walking. Somewhere there had to be life. The sun beat down, cruel and merciless. Daniel stumbled and fell to his knees. Sand filled his mouth and burned his skin. He pressed his palms into the hot ground, trying to rise, but his strength was gone. His vision blurred, and all he could see was golden light swallowing the world. For a moment, he thought this was the end. Then he heard voices, soft, distant, not human, strange tones carried by the wind. His eyes opened just enough to see shadows moving against the sun. Figures approached, tall, elegant shapes with long hair shining in the desert light. Their skin glowed a deep blue, and their eyes shone like silver stars. Aliens. Daniel tried to reach for his blade, but his hand was too weak. He collapsed onto the sand as the shadows surrounded him. The aliens spoke among themselves in a language he did not understand. Their voices were sharp, cautious, and filled with distrust. One of them pointed at him, as if suggesting they should leave him to die. Another shook her head. Daniel could feel their eyes studying him like he was a dangerous animal. He could not fight. He could only watch. From behind the tall figures stepped a small shape, a child. Her skin was the same glowing blue, but her eyes were wide with innocence. She walked past the warriors and stood before Daniel, tilting her head as if curious. For a long moment, she stared at him, her little hand clenching and unclenching nervously. Then, with a step forward, she reached out and touched his hand. The contact was soft, gentle, and filled with something Daniel had not felt in days, kindness. The warriors gasped. Some shouted at her to step back, but the child did not listen. She smiled, and in her soft alien voice, she said one simple word. Though Daniel could not understand, he knew its meaning. Friend. Darkness closed in again, and Daniel lost consciousness. When he awoke, he was no longer on the burning sand. He was inside a shaded tent made of strange fabric stitched with symbols. Cool air brushed over him. Water touched his lips, and he drank greedily. Around him, the blue-skinned aliens stood in a circle, their silver eyes watching carefully. They were armed, their armor shining with bronze and gold plates, decorated with flowing patterns. These were not savages, they were a proud people. Daniel's gaze searched for the child, and there she was, sitting near him, smiling. She had saved him. He whispered a hoarse, "Thank you," though he knew she could not understand. The tallest warrior stepped forward, her beauty both sharp and intimidating. Her long hair flowed like black silk, and her piercing eyes locked onto Daniel's. She spoke in her language, her voice stern and commanding. Another warrior, older and calm, answered her with hesitation. Daniel could not follow their words, but their body language told a story. They argued over him. Some wanted him gone. Some wanted him dead. Only a few believed he should stay. Tension filled the tent like a storm waiting to break. Daniel felt like prey surrounded by hunters. But then the child stood, walked to his side, and held his arm. Her small voice cut through the argument. Whatever she said, it silenced them. The leader looked down at Daniel again, her face unreadable. After a long pause, she gave a single nod. The warriors lowered their weapons, though their eyes remained suspicious. Daniel knew one thing. He was alive because of the child. But he also knew this was not the end of his struggle. These people did not trust him. They did not welcome him. For now, he was a guest in their world, but he was also a prisoner of their judgment. As night fell, Daniel lay awake, listening to the alien voices outside the tent. He wondered who these people were. He wondered why the child had chosen to help him when the others wished to leave him behind. He did not yet understand their world, their fears, or their rules. But he knew this. The bond had already begun, and soon it would change everything. Daniel awoke with the sound of distant wind blowing against the tent. The desert was quiet, but inside the camp, life had begun to stir. Alien voices moved like a rhythm through the morning air, commands, whispers, the clash of metal being sharpened. He sat up slowly, his body still weak from days of wandering. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, and once again he saw the blue-skinned family watching him. The child, the one who had touched his hand, sat closest to him. She smiled and whispered something in her language, her silver eyes glowing with innocence. The older warriors were not so kind. Their faces were hard, their stares sharp like blades. One warrior even placed his hand on the hilt of his weapon whenever Daniel moved. It was clear they did not trust him. The tall woman, the leader of the group, entered the tent. Her armor shimmered in the faint light, golden patterns across bronze plates. She looked at Daniel with eyes that did not blink, as if she could see into his very soul. She spoke slowly, carefully, as though testing him. Daniel shook his head. He could not understand. Frustration flashed across her face. She turned to the others, speaking quickly, her tone stern. Daniel caught only fragments of meaning from their gestures. They were debating again. One warrior wanted him gone. Another argued that he could not survive alone. A third warned that he might be a scout for an enemy clan. Their suspicion grew heavier with every word. Daniel raised his hands, trying to show he was not a threat. "I'm not your enemy," he said, his voice low but firm. They did not understand his words, but perhaps they could feel the truth in his tone. The child stood and walked to him. She took his hand again and pulled it gently toward her chest, as if declaring to all that he was under her protection. The warriors exchanged glances, uncomfortable, uncertain. The leader sighed and gestured for Daniel to rise. They brought him outside. The camp was hidden in a canyon, its walls high and protective. Dozens of alien families lived there, men, women, and children, all dressed in the same bronze and leather armor. Fires burned, tools clanged, and smoke rose into the clear desert sky. When the people saw Daniel, silence spread like a shadow. Every eye turned toward him. Mothers pulled their children close. Warriors tightened their grips on their weapons. To them, he was not a guest. He was a stranger who did not belong. The leader gestured for him to follow. She pointed to the edge of the camp, where tools were broken and tents needed repair. Then she motioned to the desert, where water skins had to be filled and firewood had to be carried. Daniel understood. If he wished to stay, he had to prove his worth. He nodded. The day was long and merciless. Daniel worked beside them, lifting heavy stones, repairing broken frames with whatever knowledge he had, and carrying bundles of wood on his sore shoulders. His hands bled, his muscles screamed, but he did not stop. The aliens watched in silence, expecting him to collapse. Instead, he endured. At one point, the child ran to him, carrying a small clay jug of water. She offered it with a bright smile. He drank, whispering thanks, and her laughter rang out across the camp. For the first time, the sound of joy came from the alien family, and it was because of him. Some of the warriors frowned, but others looked less certain now. They had seen his effort. They had seen the way the child trusted him. Seeds of doubt began to form in their suspicion. That night, the camp gathered for a meal. Fires glowed against the canyon walls, shadows dancing like spirits. The people ate in silence, still wary of the human among them. Daniel sat apart, alone, with only the child at his side. She shared her food with him, breaking pieces of strange bread and offering them with both hands. The leader watched. Her sharp gaze lingered, but her expression softened, only slightly. She leaned toward the older warrior and whispered. The warrior shook his head, but she did not argue further. Daniel ate slowly, sensing the storm of mistrust still surrounding him. He knew one mistake could end his life here. When the fire grew low, a distant howl echoed across the desert. The camp grew tense. Warriors rose to their feet, scanning the darkness. Daniel could feel the fear ripple through them. The leader barked an order. Guards rushed to the canyon edges. The people whispered nervously. Something dangerous was near. Daniel stood as well, his hand on the hilt of his broken blade. Though he was weak and still recovering, he could not ignore the tension. He moved closer to the child, shielding her unconsciously. The warriors noticed. Some sneered at his foolishness. What could one human do? Yet the leader's eyes narrowed, studying him. The night passed without an attack, but the warning was clear. Danger hunted them. And as Daniel lay under the stars, surrounded by strangers who half wanted him gone, he realized the truth. His time in this camp was not only about survival, it was about trust. And trust, he knew, was the hardest thing to earn. The days passed slowly in the canyon camp. The desert sun was still merciless, but Daniel was no longer wandering alone. Now he worked among the alien family who had saved him. Every task was a test. Every glance from the warriors was a reminder that he was not trusted. Yet, the child never doubted him. She followed him wherever he went, laughing when he tripped over stones, clapping when he lifted heavy loads, and tugging at his sleeve when she wanted him to sit beside her. Daniel had no idea what her name was. He could not speak her language, but he began to call her Little Star in his heart. The alien mother, graceful yet stern, watched quietly. She did not speak to him much, but when the child laughed, her hard eyes softened. The tall leader, however, never smiled. She carried herself like steel, every glance reminding Daniel that his place was fragile. One morning, Daniel was repairing a broken tool. Its handle had snapped, leaving the blade useless. The aliens had cast it aside, but Daniel studied the pieces, searching for a way. With scraps of wood and strips of leather, he shaped a new grip, binding it tightly. When he returned it to the family, the older warrior raised an eyebrow. He tested it, striking the ground. The tool held firm. For the first time, a small nod of approval came his way. It was not much, but it was enough. Later, the child tugged at his arm, pulling him toward the canyon edge. She pointed to the horizon, where the desert stretched endless and red in the evening light. She spoke quickly, her little hands painting shapes in the air. Daniel could not understand, but he listened. And when she called him something that sounded like uncul, the mother gasped. Daniel blinked. The word was unfamiliar, yet the meaning was clear. The child had given him a name, her own word for uncle. The mother said nothing, but her eyes stayed on Daniel longer that night. Something inside her had changed, but not everyone shared that feeling. Whispers spread through the camp. Some warriors said he was dangerous, a trick sent by enemies. Others claimed the family was weak for keeping him. Daniel could see the mistrust in every corner, like shadows waiting to strike. That evening, as fires burned low, Daniel went to fetch water from the canyon's small spring. The air was cool, the sky above filled with stars. He bent down, filling the jug, when he felt the sharp edge of metal at his neck. A warrior stood behind him, blade pressed close. His silver eyes burned with anger. "You do not belong," the alien hissed in his tongue. Daniel did not understand the words, but the meaning was written in his face. Slowly, Daniel raised his hands. "I am not your enemy," he whispered, but his voice was swallowed by the night. Before the blade could strike, another voice called out, sharp, commanding. The tall leader stepped from the shadows, her golden armor catching the starlight. She barked an order, and the warrior lowered his weapon with a growl. The leader's gaze locked onto Daniel. Cold, unforgiving. But then her eyes shifted to the water jug he had filled. She studied it, then studied him. Finally, she turned and walked away without a word. The warrior followed, leaving Daniel shaken but alive. The next day brought new trials. Raiders were near. Scouts returned with warnings. Fires in the distance, strange tracks across the sand. The camp grew tense. Weapons were sharpened, defenses prepared. Daniel saw fear in their eyes, though they hid it well. He had seen this before back on Earth. Families preparing for war, children hiding behind mothers, warriors pretending they were not afraid. That night, as the camp slept lightly, Daniel sat by the fire with the child curled beside him. Her small hand rested on his arm. He looked at the alien stars above, brighter and sharper than Earth's. He wondered if he would ever see home again. But then he realized something. Home was not always a place. Sometimes it was the people who chose to stand beside you. He glanced at the sleeping child and whispered softly, "If I must fight to protect you, then I will." The flames flickered. Shadows stretched across the canyon walls. Somewhere in the darkness, unseen eyes watched the camp. Raiders moved closer, waiting for the right moment. Daniel did not know what tomorrow would bring. He only knew this. Trust was still fragile, but bonds were forming in the shadows. And those bonds would soon be tested by fire. A pale moon hung above the canyon, its silver light spilling across the stone walls. The campfires burned low, their smoke rising into the cold air. Families slept close to one another, weapons within reach. Even the warriors rested uneasily, their hands never far from the hilts of their blades. Daniel lay awake, staring at the stars. He could not sleep. Something in the air felt wrong. The desert was alive with silence, the kind of silence that warned of danger. His instincts, sharpened by years of struggle, told him trouble was near. Then he heard it, a faint scrape of metal on stone, a muffled whisper, the sound of feet moving where no one should be. Daniel sat up, eyes scanning the shadows. At first, nothing stirred, but then he saw them, dark figures crawling over the canyon walls like spiders. Raiders. He sprang to his feet and grabbed his broken blade. The child, asleep beside him, stirred. Daniel pressed a finger to his lips, urging her to stay quiet. She obeyed, though fear widened her eyes. Before he could act, a scream ripped through the night. An arrow of fire shot across the sky and landed in the camp, setting a tent ablaze. The silence shattered into chaos. Warriors leapt to their feet, mothers pulled children close, and the air filled with the clash of steel. The raiders had come. They swarmed the camp like a tide, lean, vicious aliens with black war paint streaking their faces. Their eyes burned with greed and hatred. They carried jagged blades and curved bows, their armor pieced together from scavenged scraps. The camp's warriors rushed to meet them, clashing in a storm of sparks and shouts. The leader barked orders, her golden armor gleaming as she struck down the first attacker with a single, brutal swing. The older warrior fought at her side, his movements precise and deadly. But there were too many raiders. Daniel did not hesitate. He gripped his broken blade and ran into the fight. His body was weak, his strength not yet returned, but his spirit was iron. He struck at the nearest raider, the blade slashing across leather armor. The enemy staggered, surprised by the human's ferocity. The warriors glanced at him, shocked. He was not one of them, yet he fought like one of their own. Daniel pushed forward, shielding the alien mother and child as raiders stormed their tent. He blocked a strike with his forearm, pain exploding through his bones, but he did not fall. With a roar, he drove the jagged edge of his blade into the raider's chest. Blood spilled. The enemy fell. The child screamed, but not in fear, in warning. Another raider leapt from the shadows, blade raised. Daniel spun too late. The strike cut across his shoulder, tearing flesh. He stumbled, blood running hot down his arm. But before the raider could finish him, the mother struck with her spear, piercing the attacker through the chest. She pulled Daniel back, shouting words he could not understand. Her eyes burned with urgency. Stay alive. The battle raged on. Fire spread, smoke rising into the night. The canyon echoed with screams and the clash of metal. For every raider cut down, another seemed to appear. Daniel fought until his body shook with exhaustion. His blade grew heavy, his wounds burned, yet he refused to retreat. Every time he fell, he stood again. Every time the child was in danger, he placed himself between her and the enemy. At one point, 3 raiders cornered him against the canyon wall. His knees weakened, his vision blurred. He thought it was the end. But then, from across the battlefield, the leader came. She moved like a storm, her blade carving arcs of light. In moments, the raiders lay dead at her feet. She looked at Daniel, bleeding, panting, refusing to fall. And for the first time, respect flickered in her eyes. The raid lasted until the first light of dawn. When the sun rose, The camp was scarred and broken. Tents burned to ash. Blood stained the sand. Many raiders lay dead, their bodies scattered like broken shadows. The survivors fled into the desert, leaving behind silence once more. Daniel collapsed to his knees, his blade slipping from his hand. His wounds throbbed, his strength gone. He swayed, darkness closing in on his vision. Before he fell, he felt small hands clutch his arm. The child. Tears streamed down her face, her voice calling him by the word she had given him. Uncle. He smiled weakly. He had kept his promise. And then the world went black. When Daniel opened his eyes again, he was inside the tent. His wounds had been bound with strange herbs and cloth. The mother sat beside him, exhaustion on her face, but relief in her eyes. The leader stood at the entrance, her gaze sharp, her armor stained with blood. For the first time, she spoke a single word he could understand. Warrior. Daniel closed his eyes, too weak to reply. But inside, he knew he had earned something tonight. Not full trust. Not yet. But the beginning of respect. And respect was the first step toward belonging. Daniel drifted in and out of sleep. Pain pulled him under like dark waves. But each time he opened his eyes, he saw faces around him. The child was always there, sitting close, her small hand resting on his bandaged arm, as if her touch alone could keep him alive. The mother moved silently, grinding herbs, changing his bandages, wiping the sweat from his brow. And the leader, though she never spoke much, stood watch at the tent's entrance, like a sentinel guarding not only her people, but him too. Days passed. Slowly, strength returned to his body. The herbs they used were strange, glowing faintly under moonlight, filling his wounds with heat. Daniel's skin healed faster than he expected. Scars would remain, but he was alive. One evening, as the desert winds howled outside, the family gathered around him. The fire inside the tent flickered, painting their faces in warm light. For the first time, Daniel saw them not as strangers, but as something closer to kin. Their eyes were tired, their movements heavy. These are not conquerors. These were survivors. The older warrior spoke first, his voice low and steady. He gestured to Daniel, then to the child, then back to himself. Slowly, with patience, he tried to teach Daniel their words. Simple words. Names. Family. Friend. Home. Daniel repeated, clumsy but eager. The child laughed at his broken pronunciation, but her laughter was kind, not mocking. She touched her chest and said her name clearly. Sarah. At last, Daniel had a name for his little star. That night, as the fire burned low, the mother began to speak. Her voice was soft, but her eyes carried storms. She traced shapes in the sand, drawing a circle and then crossing it out. Daniel did not understand at first, but then the older warrior joined her, and together they told a story, not with words Daniel knew, but with gestures, expressions, and fragments of meaning. Slowly, Daniel understood. This family, this small group, was hunted, not by raiders alone, but by their own kind. Their clan had once been powerful, proud. But when war came, when their leaders demanded conquest, this family refused. They had chosen peace. They had chosen life. And for that, they had been cast out, banished, hunted, condemned as traitors. Now they wandered the desert, never safe, always watched by enemies who wanted them erased. Daniel's heart clenched. He looked at them, truly looked. He saw not warriors, but people who had sacrificed everything to follow what they believed was right. They had chosen to protect their children instead of joining endless bloodshed. In their pain, Daniel recognized something deeply human. On Earth, he had seen this too. Families broken by war, villages crushed because they refused to fight for the wrong cause. He had seen children made orphans, mothers made widows, all because of power-hungry leaders. Daniel leaned forward, placing a hand on his chest. Earth, he said slowly. Then he drew shapes in the sand, circles for planets, a line for a horizon. He tried to explain. His world, too, had suffered wars. His people, too, had known loss. The mother watched him. The older warrior tilted his head. The leader's eyes softened, just for a breath. They understood, not the details, not the words, but the feeling. The child, Syrah, placed her small hand on his scarred arm. Her voice was clear as she whispered, Uncle, family. From that night onward, things changed. The warriors no longer stared at him with pure suspicion. They still watched, still questioned, but now there was a shadow of respect in their eyes. Daniel was no longer just an outsider who had stumbled into their lives. He was something more, a man who had shed blood for them, and who carried scars like theirs. The mother began to trust him with small tasks again. She let him grind herbs, fetch water, repair tools. The older warrior taught him more words in their language, patient even when Daniel failed. And Syrah never left his side, laughing at his clumsy speech but clapping when he finally got something right. Yet, Daniel also saw the fear in their eyes whenever scouts returned. The desert was not safe. Enemies were near, and sooner or later, the family would be forced to make a choice, run again or fight. One night, as the stars blazed above, Daniel sat outside the tent with Syrah asleep in his lap. The leader approached silently. She studied him for a long time, her face unreadable. Finally, she spoke a word he now understood. Choice. Daniel looked at her, confused. She pointed to him, then to the desert, then to the family. She was telling him what he already knew. He was part of their fate now. His presence brought danger. His presence also brought hope. Daniel nodded slowly. He had no family left on Earth, no home to return to. But here, among outcasts and hunted souls, he had found something worth protecting. He looked down at the sleeping child, then back at the leader. My choice, he said quietly, though she might not understand the words. I stay. The leader's eyes held his for a moment longer. Then, for the first time, she placed her hand lightly on his shoulder. A gesture of respect, a gesture of trust. And Daniel knew his bond with them was no longer fragile. It was becoming unbreakable. The days after the raid were heavy with silence. The camp worked to repair what had been broken, but the scars remained, burned tents, blood-stained sand, and the memory of screams in the night. Daniel felt the weight too, though his wounds were healing. Each scar on his body now tied him to this family more than words ever could. But peace did not last. One afternoon, scouts returned with grim faces. The leader listened to their reports, her expression hard as stone. Then she called the family together. Daniel stood nearby, watching as tension filled the air. He understood little of their words, but he could feel the truth. Something dangerous was coming. The clan had found them. Not the raiders, not scavengers, no. This was worse. It was their own people, the powerful tribe that had cast them out. And they were close. The family prepared quickly, gathering weapons, packing supplies, whispering plans. Daniel tried to help, but the mother placed a hand on his arm, shaking her head. Her eyes told him everything. This was not just about survival. This was about judgment. That night, torches burned at the edge of the canyon. Shadows gathered, rows of armored warriors standing tall, their weapons gleaming under the moon. They were organized, disciplined, far stronger than raiders. At their front stood a figure draped in silver armor, a chieftain of the clan. His voice thundered through the canyon, sharp and merciless. Daniel did not know the words, but he understood the command. Hand over the human. The leader of Daniel's family stepped forward, her golden armor shining defiantly. She answered with fire in her tone, her words filled with refusal. The chieftain's face twisted in anger. He barked another order, and his warriors raised their weapons. The canyon was still. Everyone waited for the choice. Daniel stepped forward. His heart pounded, but his decision was already made. He placed a hand on his chest and then spread his arms wide, showing he carried no threat. I will go, he said softly. The family gasped. They might not understand his words, but they felt the meaning. He would give himself up to save them. The mother shook her head, her eyes flashing with pain. The older warrior growled in protest, but Daniel only smiled sadly. He had nothing left to lose. They had given him kindness when they had no reason to. He could not let them pay the price for him. He took a step toward the chieftain. Then a small cry cut through the night. Syrah ran forward, her little hands clutching Daniel's arm. Tears streamed down her glowing blue cheeks as she shouted, her voice trembling but fierce. The words she screamed echoed against the canyon walls, reaching every warrior's ears. Aku, uncle, family. The camp froze. Even the silver-armored chieftain hesitated. Murmurs rippled through the warriors. They had expected fear. They had expected betrayal. But instead, they saw a child stand between them and the human, claiming him as her own. The leader of the family stepped forward too, placing her hand on Daniel's shoulder. Her eyes burned with defiance as she faced the clan. Whatever words she spoke, they carried steel. He is one of us. The mother followed, standing beside her daughter. The older warrior lifted his spear and pointed it toward the enemy, his stance a clear warning. They had made their choice. The chieftain roared with rage. His warriors shifted, ready for blood. The canyon trembled with tension, the firelight flickering against steel. Daniel tightened his grip on his broken blade, his body aching but his spirit unshaken. He knew the odds were hopeless. He knew they could all die here. But he also knew one truth. He was no longer alone. These people had chosen him, and he had chosen them. The silence broke when the first arrow flew. Warriors clashed, blades ringing like thunder. The canyon once again became a battlefield, brighter than day under the fire-lit sky. And at the center of it all stood Daniel, fighting not for survival, but for family. The choice had been made, and there was no turning back. Arrows streaked across the night sky like falling stars. Steel clashed against steel, echoing through the stone walls. Flames burned high, turning the battlefield into a storm of smoke and fire. The clan's warriors pressed forward with brutal force, their silver armor gleaming, their weapons sharp and merciless. But Daniel stood his ground. His broken blade, cracked and chipped, was small compared to their shining swords. Yet he swung it with a strength born not from muscle, but from purpose. Every strike was for the child who called him uncle. Every step was for the mother who had healed his wounds. Every breath was for the leader who had given him respect. The family fought beside him. The older warrior moved with deadly precision, cutting down enemy after enemy. The mother defended the children, her spear flashing like lightning. The leader was a storm of fire, her golden armor glowing against the flames as she clashed with the chieftain himself. Daniel's body burned with pain, his scars tearing open, blood dripping into the sand. Yet he refused to fall. For the first time since his crash, he was not a lost man wandering alone. He was part of something greater. The chieftain shouted, his voice thunder across the canyon. He struck down two warriors and pointed his blade at Daniel. Rage twisted his face. Rage that his clan's strength was challenged by a single human. He charged. Daniel braced himself, but he was no match for the chieftain's power. Each blow from the silver blade rattled his bones, forcing him back step by step. Sparks flew as metal clashed. The crowd of warriors circled, their shouts rising in fury. The chieftain struck hard, sending Daniel crashing to the ground. His blade skittered across the sand out of reach. The chieftain raised his weapon for the killing blow. Aku! The cry pierced the chaos. Sira's voice, high and desperate, rang out across the battlefield. The child broke through the circle of warriors, throwing herself between Daniel and the silver blade. The chieftain froze. His weapon trembled in the air. Gasps rippled through the clan. A child, an innocent, stood in defiance of him, choosing the human over her own blood. Daniel's heart thundered. With a surge of strength, he grabbed a fallen spear from the ground and thrust upward. The blade struck true, knocking the chieftain back. The leader of the family seized the moment, charging forward and driving her sword into the enemy's chest. The chieftain fell, his silver armor shattered, his voice silenced forever. The battlefield stilled. The clan's warriors hesitated, their leader dead, their power broken. They looked at one another, then at Daniel. Bloodied, scarred, barely standing but alive. And beside him stood the child, her hand clutching his tightly, her eyes burning with courage. Whispers spread through the crowd. For the first time, doubt cracked their pride. They had come to destroy a human, but what they saw instead was a bond stronger than their swords. A human and an alien family standing as one. Slowly, weapons lowered. One by one, the clan stepped back. The war was over. When the sun rose, the canyon was quiet again. The dead were mourned, the wounded tended. But a new story had begun to spread among the people. A story of a human who had bled for a family not his own. A story of a child who had defied her clan to protect him. Daniel sat by the fire, his body heavy with exhaustion. Sarah leaned against him, her small hand holding his, her smile soft despite the tears on her cheeks. The mother sat close, her gaze warm with gratitude. The older warrior nodded with respect, and the leader, ever silent, stood tall, but with eyes that no longer burned with suspicion. For the first time, Daniel felt no doubt. He belonged. He looked up at the alien stars, brighter than Earth's, endless in their beauty. His voice was weak but steady. "I was only one human," he whispered, "but one bond can change everything." The child pressed her head against his arm, whispering the word that had become his place in their world. "Aiku." And in that moment, Daniel understood. Family was not about blood, not about planets, not about species. Family was the bond you chose and the bond that chose you. And that bond had changed an entire world.